Hey, I'm Scott Jones from Emeals, and you're listening to Real Food for Real Life. On this episode, I have the great pleasure of talking to Evan Schiff, who's a winemaker at Francis Ford Coppola Winery. In addition to hearing what it takes to produce some of America's most respected wines, Evan also breaks down the basics of food and wine pairing to make it easy for you to do the same at home, whether it's a weeknight meal or weekend entertaining. Now, before we get to the interview, I have a few housekeeping items. First, send us your questions and comments. We read all of them. And if you have a suggestion for a future guest or a potential topic, I'd love to know that too. You can find us on Twitter at Emeals using the hashtag AskEmeals. We also have an email address. It's community@emeals.com. If you don't already subscribe to our podcast, subscribe today. It's simple to do. You can find us at itunes.com/podcast/Real Food for Real Life. And while you're there, leave us a review. And finally, if you'd like more information on Emeals and our variety of meal plan food styles, you can find us at emeals.com. Try any of our meal plans free for 2 weeks, be it paleo, clean eating, or gluten-free. You can even have your shopping list sent directly to Walmart pickup at no charge, so your groceries are waiting for you. That's it. On with the show. Hey, Evan, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to have you on the show. It's that time of the year where people are getting out, entertaining outdoors around the grill, beautiful weather, and it's also that time of year when people start probably thinking about wine with food. So I hope you're up for letting me pick your brain today.
Sure, no problem.
I do want to start before we get into the actual information about wine. I was reading your bio and saw there was a very interesting story about your early adventures in winemaking as a 7-year-old. Were you kind of a mad scientist then?
I guess so. I mean, I grew up, my parents were in a wine appreciation group, and one of the things I remember is my dad would always put down his wines on those peg wine holders that were not temperature controlled.
Yeah.
That were really popular in the 80s. They look like Lincoln Logs almost.
Right.
Anyway, so I thought, well, that's what you do. You take your beverages and you lay them down there for a while, and they get better, and you enjoy it with a nice meal. And so I decided to take a 2-liter plastic bottle and put Kool-Aid and all sorts of interesting kid-like fruit juices in there, and voila, it fermented for sure because it blew up all over the carpet. And I had to madly clean up the carpet before my mom got home, and I actually didn't get caught. That's amazing. I cleaned it really well.
So what's great is now that scientific experiment led to you now being with a winemaker at one of the most esteemed companies in the world with Coppola Wine, and you oversee the winemaking for their diamond collection, which I know I see all over these days with a lot of different varietal wines. And I guess I'd just love to know from a winemaker, because this is pretty cool to have this access to someone like you. When you're thinking about making wines that are food friendly, whether it's a white wine or a red wine, as a winemaker, how do you just help us understand what's in your mind when you set out to make a wine each year?
Well, for each year, I'd say one of the major things I'm thinking about is what's your goal. And for us, the goals are pretty basic. It's making people happy. And
right.
So I would say what goes along with that is consistency and being a sure bet. So when the customer goes and gets a bottle of Coppola, they know, okay, I'm going to get these flavors and aromas, and I know it's going to be a crowd pleaser, and I know what I'm going to get when I make my purchase. And furthermore, it's going to be a good value. People, if they're going to get disappointed, they're going to get disappointed because they spent a whole lot of money and they didn't get much, or right. Something like that. And that's definitely, we want to be in that zone of being food friendly and a good value. So I think that comes with also with the food aspect. having the proper amount of acidity, right amount of alcohol, right oak influence, and just having a really good representation of the varietal because there are so many different varietals that we do, and a lot of winemaking is about expression. It's not just science, and it's not just only art or doing something without any kind of scientific basis. So it's really marrying those two ideologies together and coming together in a very kind of organic way where it's just like very natural and it makes sense. And you're talking about pairing food and wine. I mean, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
People have been doing it since, civilizations began.
Right.
So I feel really connected to our roots, as a human being, and as part of this of being connected to other people and enjoying meals. And, I feel really kind of honored to be a part of that process because you're also creating memories, and, you want to be associated with like a great meal, like say Thanksgiving or going to a ball game or, with your son or something. Like you want to be part of that. And I think that's exciting for me creatively.
Yeah. Well, that actually is a great segue. This whole idea of baseball, especially this summer. Emeals has partnered with Coppola around the Diamond Collection, and we've created some meals that are on our occasion plan called Ballpark Bites, and it's where we developed kind of updated riffs on popular ballpark foods found around the country. And I just wonder, because the pairings are just amazing. But I would say as a winemaker, as you're creating these wines and tasting, as the wine is fermenting and then aging, are there times? And I'm assuming there are times when you are have a picture of a particular food item that you're already thinking, man, this would grow great with this wine. I mean, are you thinking food while you're also thinking about, whether the wine, the nuances of the wine?
Oh yeah. Well, who isn't?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's an interesting thing because I think that when you talk to a lot of winemakers and people in the business, a lot of times when they're trying to describe things to people, you're describing things with associations or with, I get cherries or I get strawberries or I get certain things in the wine. And a lot of people are kind of mystified by that. They're, well, why are you putting that in there? Like, how does it get in there? It's like, well, it comes from a fruit, and all the things in that fruit can be similar to other things that we're very familiar with, whether it be bananas or cherries or blueberries or anything like that. So I feel like it's very natural to answer your question. It's very natural to drink or try a dark Cabernet, for example, and have like some black sour cherry in there.
Right.
Or if you're tasting a Pinot Noir, you can get a little bit of that spice element, like a baking spice. So I feel like there's definitely a close association with describing food and wine together as we're kind of describing it and imagining where it's going to go just right out of the fermenter, like you're mentioning. You can, with enough experience, you can kind of see what the lifeline of the time scales or what's going to happen in the future of this wine as it kind of goes through the process and finally makes it into the bottle. I just
picked up on something you were saying about some of the richer flavors in a Cabernet. I know that you have a particular focus in red wine, so help us understand difference between, say, a Pinot Noir and that claret Cabernet Sauvignon. One is really dark, one is a little bit lighter. I mean, what's unique about those grapes that give it a different color and body and mouthfeel?
Well, I'd say that one of the major things to look at is just definitely like the grape itself. If you look at, you mentioned light and dark. Well, the actual berries are lighter for your typical Pinot Noir,
right?
When you actually look on them on the vine, and so that is reference to the pigmentation of the fruit. And I think when that translates over into the wine, typically the Pinots, they kind of melt in your mouth a little bit more. They're soft and they're delicate. People use this kind of terminology because they're not very tannic. They're not very persistent in terms of drying your mouth out. So they're very light. They have the acid kind of pokes through a little bit more. They tend to be maybe a little more red berry driven. You tend to get a higher spice out of them. And it really does depend on where they're grown and how they're grown, because they are influenced typically by coastal weather. Cabernets, they grow in much hotter environments, so they tend to build a suntan, if you will. So they have much darker skin color, and they tend to the skins tend to be a little bit tougher.
Right.
And they need more time to fully ripen. So typically what you'll see is you'll harvest the Pinot Noir first because it's ready first, and then the Cabernet needs more time out in the sun to fully soften those harder skins to the point where they are ready to harvest. And when you do harvest them, they tend to be a little bit more structured on the palate. So they do have a more of a persistent tannin structure that kind of lengthens it out. They tend to have a little bit more of maybe a darker fruit tone, I would say, like more blueberries and black cherries and things like that. And they tend to have maybe a little bit more of a black pepper spice to them. They complement a fair amount of oak. It's also known that you have to match the amount of oak on a wine with the density of how much fruit is present. So I'd say that one's delicate and one's a little bit more robust is the simple way to understand it.
Right, and that makes sense. And I guess just to clarify, so I understand, as you were saying, one has a thicker skin than the other. The Pinot Noir having a little bit of a thinner skin, the Cabernet Sauvignon having a little more thick skin. And just to clarify, that's where all the color and the tannins are. So I guess more skin, more color, more tannins, less skin. It's not as tannic. It has more of that smoother mouthfeel. Is that the way that we should think about it?
I think that's a very good way to think about it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and then how does that translate over to white wines? Because the white wines, when they're made, they're not fermented or aged in contact with their skins, are they?
No, you're right. I mean, the only exception to that is if you're going to talk about a rosé. But I don't want to complicate things too much. But basically, if you're making a traditional white wine, that's absolutely right. They usually don't have as much skin contact. You put them in a great big thing called a press, which squeezes the grapes kind of like a sponge, and it will separate the juice from the skins, and then that wine is fermented cold off the skins very delicately. We typically stir the tanks here to bring out some of that mousse character, some of that good body and mouthfeel that you get from some good Chardonnays, for example. But yeah, it's definitely a different process for the whites. The typical white doesn't need to age very much. It's another question I get quite often. That, a lot of white wines can get to the market pretty quick because they're guava and they have a little bit more of a yellow fruit tone, and they tend to soften up right away. And you can get a Sauvignon Blanc or a Pinot Grigio, for example, in the bottle like a few months afterwards.
Yeah,
for sure.
And that also, I've got a ton of questions. So making that comparison that we were talking about between, say, Pinot Noir and Cabernet Sauvignon, if we looked at what I think of as a kind of a light, crisp wine like a Pinot Grigio, for example, or a Sauvignon Blanc, compared to a richer Chardonnay. So what makes one lighter and one more full-bodied if they're not having that skin contact like the red grapes? Is there a kind of an easy way to explain that?
Well, I think the easiest way that most people would probably be familiar with is their familiarity with Chardonnay. Typically, that is going to be oaked, and so that oak influence is really going to change the mouthfeel and also the aromatics over to being more of a vanilla and almonds kind of mixed into the wine. So the Chardonnays, they tend to have also maybe a little bit more of a buttery feel to them.
Right.
And I won't go into all the science of what's going on and why, but basically that's how most people relate to them. And I know a lot of people that love Chardonnay, and that's really what they're kind of gravitating towards is, I think, is a little bit the oak influence, that nice crisp melon character, some of the other influences you get there. And then you can contrast that to a Pinot Grigio or a Sauvignon Blanc. They tend to be just a lot more grapefruit. They tend to have maybe even a higher carbonation level or something like that, and they tend to be a little bit higher in acid and maybe a little bit lower in alcohol. It really everything really depends though on when you pick the grapes. That's really what the magic is. So you can get a lot of different parameters coming in chemistry-wise with the grapes. But I would say typically you're looking at that as being the major difference between those two.
Yeah, because I know
So,
if I have a Italian Pinot Grigio or a Sauvignon Blanc, especially from like New Zealand, I take a sip and my mouth waters immediately. Is that what you mean by acidity?
I think it's the sharpness on the tongue. It's a little bit of a bite.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The wine awakens all the senses. Like the first thing you do is you look at it, right? And you can say, okay, well, yeah, it's red or white, of course. But also, is it clear? Is it crystal clear?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Is it dark if it's a red, or is it, it can even show its age if it's a red wine that's been around for a long time. It can actually have a hint of a brown on the edge. But the point being is it's a visual experience, and then you're smelling it, obviously, and you're getting a lot of your sensation from your nose. Most of your taste is actually through your nose, and then you actually are tasting the wine. What's the entry? What's the mid palate? And what's the finish? That's kind of the order of how it goes across your palate. And I think that then you have also the tactile. That's whether or not the wine is more milky and full-bodied. Milky as in, imagine how milk is a little bit thicker on your tongue, right?
Right.
The viscosity, and imagine something that's very watery and thin,
like
that's
fat-free milk versus whole milk, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. So what
Yeah.
I'm saying is that I think that when you're describing acid, it actually is one of the basic senses of tasting a wine, and it's a little bit of a bite, kind of on the entry and on the mid palate. So it's kind of like imagine it if you were to, if you wanted to have a little bit of lemon juice,
right?
That puckering, that is acid,
right? And that's what you're getting in the Pinot Grigio, for example, right? That kiss of lemon kind of thing.
Yeah, you can definitely get the acid. I mean, it's not citric acid, but it's definitely an acid that will hit your taste buds, and depending how much acid is present, it can even hurt your salivary glands. I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you, but I have many times. I've tasted many grapes in the fields before they're ready to be picked, right?
Yeah.
And what's one of the things we're actually looking for when we're picking grapes is we're looking for the accumulation of sugar and the falling of the acid. And once that acid kind of drops off towards the end of harvest,
right,
the grapes basically telling you it's ready to be picked.
Got it. So it gives you its indication.
Yes.
Well, this whole question of acidity kind of leads us into the food and wine pairing piece. As you were describing the experience of acidity, I mean, I was thinking about like a plate of fried calamari in my mind.
One of my favorites.
and so, what are some of the basics as a winemaker that you would encourage folks to be maybe considering when they're thinking about pairing a certain wine with a food, be it the Pinot Grigio or the Chardonnay or the Merlot and the Cabernet Sauvignon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I approach it, usually what I'm thinking about is what is the calling card of the dish? Is it a savory dish, or is it going to be seafood, or is it going to be grilled vegetables or something like that? So I'm kind of thinking of like the overall theme first, and then I'm thinking about kind of like what you were talking about earlier, quite honestly, when you're picking the grapes, there's a certain associations with certain foods that are natural. So if I'm thinking of something like you mentioned calamari that has actually, let's say it's fried version,
right?
I'm thinking about cutting through some of that fat with a little bit of acid. And, there's a reason why you put lemon on calamari. Fried calamari is so great. It's because the acids help cutting through those kind of like fatty, dense flavors, and kind of balances out the whole thing. I do quite a bit of cooking at home, and one of the things I kind of play around a lot with is I play around with whether it's a fat, like whether it be butter or whatnot, and salt and acid. So like I'm making a sauce, or for example, if I'm making like a 3-cheese sauce for my pasta, I'm kind of putting just a dash of vinegar in there, or I'm putting just a pinch more salt, or I'm putting just a tiny dab of butter in there, and it really can change the overall balance of everything. So I would say to a person who's just getting into it is that just try some different combinations. If you're doing some seafood or maybe chicken or something like that, I'd say that Chardonnays and white wines, try to go that route. If you're trying something heavier or savory, so something like a lamb or a roast, like a tri-tip or anything that's kind of like a big meaty dish,
Right.
try something that's a little darker red. And I'd say, everything in between is okay. Part of the fun of wine is getting to know it and getting that kind of relationship with it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess that makes a lot of sense. Is to if think about the wine and the food that you would match with it. If it's a really light wine, it's probably going to go with a lighter dish. If it's a
Right.
big, robust, real hearty hunk of meat, it's probably going to need a wine that's got a little more heft to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It can support it. I mean, if you want to make a basic kind of way to frame it in your mind when you're thinking about a meal and pairing it with wine, try to think about not overwhelming the dish with the wine, or vice versa. Like, just try. You want to have them kind of like have this harmony, right? So if you're drinking something that is hugely tannic, that what that means is that when you have a sip, it dries your mouth out, and actually your saliva sensation kind of goes down. It's almost like it's. Have you ever tried an unripe banana?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that dryness of your mouth, that's actually a concentrated, like a kind of tannic reaction.
I
so
see.
It's actually
So
pulling
it's
all
not just in wine.
No. I mean, wine is made from a fruit, and then a lot of these chemicals that are in grapes, they're in other fruits and
Right,
vegetables.
right.
So if I'm describing a tannin to someone, I use that one because it's so kind of vivid for me. Like, all that saliva out of your mouth is being dried out because all the proteins in your saliva are reacting with the tannins in the banana, and that same kind of thing on a much lesser scale can happen in a wine if it's hugely tannic. So last thing you want to do is pair that with a really delicate dish because it's just going to overwhelm you. So
Yeah.
I would say
smart.
just try to think about finding that balance.
Yeah, I guess that's a word I hear often associated with wine and food is balance, and that makes perfect sense. So here's a little bit of a curveball. I guess that was a little bit of a pun, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. So on this Diamond Adventures Ballpark Bites menu that we developed to pair with Coppola wines, we have a recipe on there that's kind of Italian sausage with grilled peppers. And the peppers are sweet, but the Italian sausage has a little bit of heat in it. So how do you approach kind of spicy food with wine?
Yeah, definitely. That is very much a harder thing it can be a harder thing to do. I'd say in general, though, the more powerful wine is, the more it's going to be able to take something with a little bit of spice because it's going to mask that up a little bit and also kind of complement it. I find that if you had something that was really kind of light and delicate, and then you tried to have that with wine-wise, let's say, something light and delicate wine, and then you have like a big, powerful, spicy dish. Well, it's just going to kind of just almost heighten that sensation of spice. So I would say probably the heavier wines would probably do better. Something like a Cabernet would do kind of well with that. Maybe a Syrah, something like that. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, Syrah, I think, is that the same thing as Shiraz? I sometimes I feel like I hear those used interchangeably.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. They are interchangeable variety-wise, yeah.
What is it about rosé that makes it so food friendly and it just seems to be so popular these days?
Yeah, that is the thing. I mean, I've seen the rosé popularity kind of skyrocket recently, and I think it's a great thing. I mean, I love rosé myself. I think that people get a little confused on what varietal it is. You can make rosé out of a red grape essentially. So the color is actually coming from making like a Pinot Noir rosé or Syrah rosé or Grenache rosé. These are actually all red grapes, and that's where that color comes from. So I'm really happy about the popularity. I'd say that it's food friendly because it has a lot of acidity, and in general, I'd say I don't know what it is, but I think acidity just kind of awakens the palate a lot, and it kind of makes you more receptive to cutting through some like heavier dishes.
Right.
I know a lot of people. I mean, let's face it. Fat is the flavoring of a lot of food, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it carries a lot of flavor.
Definitely. So if you have some acidity to cut through some of that, I think it just kind of like complements it. So if you're talking about cheese and bratwurst and things that actually do have some fat in it, I think that part of the reason it may be because of that acid kind of is bright.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is it's kind of typically, I know the rosé that we make that's typically kind of more of a strawberry cherry tone.
Right.
And I just feel like it's a really nice, delicate flavor to pair with food. So
Yeah.
I feel like, and I'd say in general too, that a lot of all the wines that we're doing are food friendly. I mean, we're definitely into pairing with a meal because we're trying to go for that overall experience. It's always been kind of our mission to be on the table with every meal, and be appropriate for every meal, I should say.
Yeah, and just to be clear, for those listeners who don't know rosé, these are not sweet wines, right?
No,
these are dry wines.
Yeah, the version that we're doing is dry. I mean, there are with champagne or sparkling wines, you can that there's a big range of different sugar levels, and ours is dry, and I feel like that is a little bit easier to pair with food. Quite honestly, I think that sweet wines, like we were talking about earlier, they tend to overpower a little bit.
Yeah.
It really depends on the dish that they're kind of going up with. I mean, you can find exceptions to that. For example, imagine like a port.
Right.
Going with dessert.
Like that's real sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah.
There's exceptions to the rule, but I'd say like the most dry wines, they tend to pair with food pretty well.
So I don't want to use too much of your time, Evan, because I know you're busy, but there's one thing I have to ask you about because I'm seeing this more and more in the marketplace, and I certainly see it across the Diamond Collection, but you guys are making wine in cans. Help me understand. I mean, obviously I get the portability and the convenience factor, but I got to imagine there are people out there thinking, well, is it the same quality of the wine that I'm getting in the bottle? Is there something different about the wine in a can? So tell us about making wine and putting it in a can.
Well, I'd say to not get too technical about what's going on with the chemistry and everything. I'd say basically for us, we're looking to have the can experience and the bottle experience be the same. We're looking for it to be you can get Diamond Pinot in a can or you can get into a bottle.
Yeah, I mean, I find that fascinating that you can get the Pinot Noir in a 4-pack of cans, and you can also get that beautiful bottle as well. It's very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very cool. It's exciting. I feel like it kind of scratches that itch of being creative. We're definitely a creative company. We will try lots of different things. We've been trying the cans, a little bit more of more products going into the cans. But we've been doing it for a long time, I should say. We've been doing Sophia Mini wine in the can for a very long time, about 10 years or so. And now we are just putting a few new products in there. That's the main difference. But, putting Pinot Noir or putting Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Grigio or Chardonnay in the can is something that's new for us. And, the rosé, it's like, let me tell you, the rosé is one of my personal favorites too. In
really?
The can.
Very
yeah,
nice.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, for the same reasons. I mean, we talked about rosé being a natural kind of pairing for food. And I feel like the portability and, kind of being able to take that on, let's say, like a picnic or something, like it's really cool. And I think that overall, though, the styles kind of match up too, I should say. If you're looking at something that you would have, let's say, with some cheese or something like that, all the wines that we are putting in the cans, I think, are pretty much ideal to take with you. So
yeah, it's funny. I just think about the 4 big ones. Like you've got your Pinot Noir, the Chardonnay, the Sauvignon Blanc, the Pinot Grigio. It's kind of like you could pair the whole menu. Like if you were having a cookout or something, that would go with everything from the appetizer all the way up to the entree. I mean, it's
yeah, definitely. I feel like sometimes my job is a little bit easy when it comes down to pairing these wines with food, just because it seems natural. So yeah, definitely I can picture that, and it says relaxation and just kind of definitely.
Oh yeah. Well, Evan, listen, man, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredibly valuable information that you've shared with us today, and can't wait to explore a few more of these Diamond Collection wines, and we'll in the show notes we'll have plenty of information about each one of the wines in the Diamond Collection, and a little bit more about you. But just want to again say thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been great. It's been a blast.
You've been listening to Real Food for Real Life. Subscribe today and you'll never miss another episode. You'll also have access to past episodes with terrific guests ranging from cookbook authors to paleo experts, to clean eating experts, to fitness pros. You can find us at itunes.com/podcast/Real Food for Real Life. And when you subscribe, be sure to leave us a review. You can also find us on other popular podcast apps like Stitcher and Google Play Music. If you have questions about this episode or our podcast, feel free to email me at community@emeals.com, or you can tweet them to me at Emeals using the hashtag #AskEmeals. To get more information on Emeals and our variety of meal plans, visit us at emeals.com. Until next time, I'm Scott Jones. Thanks for listening.